we're already probably gonna be a half hour behind.
All right,
Welcome back. We're back in Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and we are pivoting from cannabis, data privacy, cannabis to labor. And we are now turning to H55. A bill that deals with a range of interesting labor-related subjects.
The newest draft is under H 120 this morning, so it should be all.
I
Should be in.
I have it. It is right here.
That's what.
It is draft 4.1. So everybody pull out 4.1. Damien, welcome. Good to have you back.
It's great to be here for
H55, isn't that what we're doing? It's draft 4.1.
yes.
Correct. H55.
Oh, here it is, okay. You're gonna.
It only has 34 pages, so it can't be page 55.
No.
So tell us what you have done to it and where we are.
All right. For the record, I'm Damien Leonard from Legislative Council. The first big change is we have section numbers.
Yahoo!
Thank you for cheering.
And listen, sometimes that's a big deal. And this time it was because it was a bunch of different bills and we were putting them all together.
Right. So the unemployment insurance pieces represent a compromise between Department of Labor and Vermont Legal Aid. And I'll walk you through the changes. The first section is unchanged. This is the piece that Department of Labor requested to cushion the impact of disaster unemployment insurance benefits following something like this summer's flooding on employers by extending the hold harmless period for the employers from 4 weeks to 10 weeks.
So that is unchanged.
That is unchanged. In section 2, this is now combining the compromise between Department of Labor and Vermont Legal Aid on the waiver of overpayments with Senator Brock's
Fraud.
enforcement provision. The one request they made to change Senator Brock's language is on line 16 of page 2. They requested that instead of saying Commissioner shall prosecute the person under section 1368,
We talked about.
Commissioner may prosecute.
By the way, I know we have a forum issue, but I'm in health and welfare at 11:30.
I'm gonna go find the
So
chair.
they may not be. They are.
I just got a note asking if I was gonna be there.
Oh, okay. We're not gonna let you go.
Gotcha.
Yeah, okay.
Where's Wendy?
So while Randy is still here, let's do this. Wendy's presenting in transportation.
Okay, so she should be there.
She's not in Senate transportation, she must be in House transportation. Okay,
Okay,
we all agreed to that last time, I thought, the May.
I'm not
Yes,
sure.
you
I don't
okay
think
with
I was
that?
in the room.
I believe Randy was okay with that, the shallow May. Yeah, fine.
Okay, on page 3, new subsection F1 or subdivision F1. We're providing that the commissioner may waive up to the full amount of any overpayment. So it's again, providing discretion. And then new language starting on page 4 in subdivision 6. B. So this is dealing with someone whose request to waive an overpayment was denied.
So this is all if denied.
Yeah, so if your request to waive the overpayment was denied and your rights to appeal have been exhausted, you are permitted to make an additional request to waive the overpayment if you can demonstrate a material change in your circumstances that would make recovery, make it so that recovery of the overpayment would be against equity and good conscience. So in other words, things are materially worse for you now.
That is such a great line, I'm sorry. Damien, that's great, I would, so much of our work should be considered in those lights against equity or good conscience. That's
I
great.
didn't come up with a phrase, so I have to give credit to the Federal Department of Labor for that.
Well, but it's a great,
It's
it's great fun.
and then, if the commissioner finds that there's no material change in the person's circumstances, the commissioner can dismiss the request. This is subdivision B. And the commissioner's determination would be final and not subject to appeal. So in other words, this prevents the person from continually appealing, and refiling. The first request for an overpayment, you do get an appeal. Subsequent requests, if the commissioner determines that there's no material change, that's a final unappealable determination.
Right, and
So,
the first appeal if denied, the first appeal is if there has been a material change, you're like,
Like you've been
Yeah.
voted.
right, or for some other reason, it's against equity and good conscience. So in other words,
You're now disabled.
right, or, you know, there were other examples given in the original language of where the mistake was entirely the department's. The money is spent, person does not have income.
right,
Things like that where they're, and they shouldn't have, you know, there was no way they would have known that this was not permitted, et cetera. There's a variety of those instances. We're leaving that up to, the process of rulemaking and determinations there rather than setting out all of the categories of statute. The other piece here that's been added is the top of page 5. In the event that the overpayment is waived on appeal, the commissioner shall, as soon as practical, refund any amounts collected or withheld, in relation to the overpayment. So in other words, if your waiver was denied, but then you appeal the denial and you've been making these repayments, or you've had amounts withheld, the commissioner would then refund those amounts, so you're not harmed by that delay leading up to the resolution of the appeal.
okay.
And again, this is all agreed to
This is
by
all agreed to by,
labor. Yep,
we have no labor. Oh, there's Cameron, Cameron is on the
Cameron
screen,
is with
okay.
us.
We're gonna have a switch over in committee members, hi Cameron,
Thanks, Randy.
Yep.
so Randy waited until.
Thank you.
I think you'll be in good shape, Randy, because this clock is fast.
Yeah.
My God. Okay.
And then
We're on
finally,
page 5 of page 5.
the compromise on page 5, line 17 is that commissioner will not attempt to recover an overpayment or withhold amounts of benefits from a person until after either the commissioner has made a final determination regarding whether the overpayment occurred and the person's right to appeal that determination has been exhausted, or if the person has filed an application for a waiver until the commissioner has made an initial determination on that application for a waiver. So in other words, and then if you do appeal that determination, you get a refund if you're found to have been entitled to the waiver.
So you do get a refund.
Only if you have to appeal the waiver decision. Otherwise, you won't be paying.
Right.
Okay,
Okay,
all right. So that was the compromise between Labor and Vermont Legal Aid.
good,
Um,
good work, you guys.
Yep, we're just adding section numbers until we get to section 5, and this is again the fraud piece here. On page 7, line 14, we're clarifying that you're ineligible to receive benefits for a period of up to 5 years. This allows the Department of Labor to do like they do now for other fraud instances, where it's a tiered penalty. So first offense is a lower penalty, but if you're a repeat offender, you would get a higher penalty. And presumably the department can address that through rules or procedures,
You know what I mean?
as they do now with other instances of fraud.
Okay,
So
and we're again in agreement with,
I think
Still
so.
all
My
in agreement.
understanding is
Okay,
this
great.
is still agreed to.
It's,
Yep.
I'm just
thanks,
waiting.
Senator Clarkson? I believe there's a comment from legal aid.
Hi, Senator Kelly Kazmarski, staff attorney at Legal Aid. I just want to be clear that Vermont Legal Aid does not actually agree to or support additional fraud penalties.
Okay, so
So that part of this H55 was not, Vermont Legal Aid is not part of an agreement on that language.
thank you
For clarifying that.
We do
That's
appreciate it.
But
important
yes,
We
information.
have lost a forum, so
Yeah.
we're just having to pause for.
Okay,
But that's, thank you, that's good to know. So
Yes.
beginning with all the fraud sections, beginning at section,
yes, with all of the fraud sections. So with section, beginning with section 3, I believe it
I
would
think
be.
it's section 3, right? The non-disclosure, overpayment.
I believe section 3 begins the fraud language.
Nope, that's actually your language
That-
there
I
for
think,
the partial withholding of the weekly benefit.
Oh, correct, yes.
So in
correct.
section, when we get a forum back, I'll explain.
Okay.
So now that we have a quorum back, what I'm understanding legal aid to say is they are not in agreement with the changes in section 2 subsection E,
Okay, section
which deals with permitting prosecution under section 1368.
E.
So section E, that's on page 2.
Right, so Vermont Legal Aid is not,
Yeah, and then this allows the department to say may prosecute, so it changes it from the shall, but legal aid does not. As I
Right, yes.
understood,
So again, Kelly Kazmarski for the record, even with the initial proposals made by Senator Brock, Legal Aid does not support or agree to that there should be additional penalties for fraud. We appreciate that the proposals made by the Department of Labor certainly are better for unemployed workers than the initial proposal, but we would, Legal Aid believes that the penalties that exist are sufficient. It's good to note that this would be the only public benefits program where we have so many penalties. Any other program, the state does not have so many penalties for somebody who is involved in fraud allegations. These new sections would add like 3 different penalties for someone. So just to add that to the
so,
conversation.
and,
Okay.
and.
Department denied my application for unemployment because I had worked for 3 weeks in an Alaskan fish hatchery. In the process of that fraud, all my personal information was stolen.
Mm.
So that's different than somebody who's poor putting in, getting an extra $10 a week. For that kind of organized fraud, and we did see organized fraud,
Absolutely.
I don't have a problem with there being the possibility of greater penalties. For the average,
But how do you differentiate on that
Well,
going
well,
forward?
you have misdemeanors and felonies, and you have different degrees of offense and,
I think leaving discretion to the commissioners is wise, and essentially that's what
That's
what
what
you're
this does,
saying.
this does.
But also, senators, the legislature already has made huge steps in preventing fraud by investing in modernization in the UI program. The kind of fraud you're speaking of, Senator, that involves this identity theft, the modernized technology is really, I think, the only way to catch that kind of a fraudster.
We actually hear that you can engage in fraud on a much bigger scale.
Oh, is
with
that right?
Technology, yeah, I mean,
Oh.
unfortunately, the concern is that like. We're using horse and buggy, so we're not running into
Right
like
now?
brake issues,
You mean right now?
Yeah, that we have,
Absolutely,
no, but
right?
we're on paper, so fraud can be accelerated with digital technology.
But I believe the new systems that the department is investigating and contracting to
Well,
engage
yeah.
are
The hope
going
is
to,
good.
yeah.
So I think the majority of the committee was interested to hear that there was no or very little waiting period to apply again. If
Right.
you were
If you're denied,
found to be,
if you're denied.
yeah, well, not denied, I think denied has a whole different process, but if you were found to be making these false statements. I don't think
Oh, but I don't know where that is. Where's
that's
that?
page 7, line 14.
So the ineligibility for up to
Oh,
5
that-
years.
Section. Right,
Yeah, so this is after you've been found to be engaging in intentional fraud,
Mhm.
and then after notice and an opportunity for a hearing. This provision would make you liable to repay the amount of overpaid benefits. Assess an administrative penalty of up to $5,000 and ineligible to receive benefits for a period of, and the change here that the department requested is up to 5 years.
right.
So this is section 5, which, just to complete my statement from earlier, is subsection E of section 2 and section 5 are the two sections here that legal aid does not join the department.
So this is the
So this is department suggested language.
And we're just talking about section 5. That's where all the
Yeah,
section
that's-
2E
That's the fraud language. that's
and
added.
section 5 are the two
Yeah,
broad
2E
sections.
is
2E.
necessary language that references the right to prosecute.
And we move that from shall to may.
Okay.
And we are looking at this, and this provides the commissioner discretion to do this. And while that's an improvement, my understanding is Vermont Legal Aid would rather that we not have section 2 or section 5.
Section 2, subsection E.
That section 2, subsection E.
Yeah, the rest of section 2 is the waiver of overpayments.
Okay, may I just ask Kelly, are you asking us to consider striking those sections?
That would be our preference, certainly, to move ahead with the waiver provisions that Department of Labor and Legal Aid have worked quite a while to come to agreement
Right.
on,
Mhm.
and then strike the additional fraud penalties from the bill.
Okay, but 2E is more what Senator Cummings was talking about in terms of criminal behavior.
Correct.
And you wanna leave that section in.
So 2E, just to be clear,
Mhm.
is just saying that in addition to recovering the amount of overpayment, when the commissioner finds that person intentionally misrepresented or failed to disclose, so intentional fraud. With respect to their claim for benefits, the commissioner may prosecute the person under section 1368, which provides all of these additional penalties beyond recovering the overpayment. And so that's the key change there. So it used to say that
Shall.
if the, well, yeah, it used to say shall, and the existing language says, and if they're not prosecuted under section 1368,
Mhm.
and the penalty under 1373, which is sort of the general penalty,
Mhm.
is not applied, they shall be disqualified and not entitled to receive benefits for up to 26 weeks. So the current disqualification period is up to 26 weeks.
Mhm.
The it's
For any-
it's a period of 26 weeks of
yeah,
benefits
for
that
any
you're disqualified
So
from.
that would apply in section 5
Yeah.
too, if we took out
So
section
this
5.
is saying that you can't you aren't eligible to receive benefits for up to 5 years rather than 26 weeks. of
Okay,
benefit
so but
payments.
26 weeks would be the standard. We
26
didn't have
weeks.
5 years.
Law.
Yeah, so 26 weeks is the current law standard
Okay.
where you get disqualified for up to 26 weeks benefits. So you apply, your application is approved, but you're disqualified for 10 weeks of
half.
benefits.
Okay, I see
Cameron,
Cameron
correct me
coming
if I'm
on.
wrong.
Yeah, so Cameron, I think I wanna make sure we're talking about the same big question here. That there is an existing. The only existing penalty or the existing penalty for being found to be making false or misrepresentative statements or committing fraud is 26 weeks of being unable to apply.
Yes, ma'am. For the record, Cameron Wood, Policy and Legislative Affairs Director for the Department of Labor. There's nothing that I see in the changes being made here that are significantly different than our current process, other than it's allowing us to deny someone for up to 5 years. And so what I mean by that is the current process, if somebody is found to have committed fraud, we put them in overpayment. We are required by federal law to assess a 15% penalty. And then we will typically issue what are called penalty weeks, and that is up to 26 weeks for each week that we found the individual committed fraud. And so what this language that's being added here is basically saying you can do the same thing. It's just up to 5 years. And so I do think there are situations where we have had individuals who have committed egregious violations, individuals who we've ended up putting in, 30, 40 weeks of penalty weeks because the amount of fraud that they've committed. And I do think that there are situations like that where it would be appropriate to deny somebody for multiple years when they've done something to that effect. So
Senator Cummings, does that help address? I think this would be the spectrum where it goes from you said the wrong thing or you
Made a
Yeah.
mistake.
made a mistake to you could be
If the
committing egregious fraud.
discussion we're having, the word the commissioner may prosecute. Because when you have an organized computer fraud,
Mm-hmm.
this isn't some poor guy that padded his previous income, so he got more.
Well, I just want to make sure, I
I mean-
think both sections would apply to a range of people.
Right.
Is that right, Cameron? Like, you would
Yes,
then
ma'am.
have the discretion to say, this is some poor guy,
Mhm.
or this is an organized crime ring out of another country.
So it would apply to both, where we do run in, Senator Cummings is exactly right, and she mentioned this on Friday. We have two types of fraud that we are primarily trying to combat. You have the identity theft, the organized crime piece. We are a little limited in our ability to go after those individuals. So what we will typically do is work with our federal partners to try to identify, et cetera. It's usually not someone who is in Vermont, and so we can't really identify them. So this section would apply to both. If we're able to identify who that person is, and sometimes we have been able to do that, we can then apply this to them. Separate from that, when you have the individual who is filing and collecting benefits, and not reporting wages, for example, or they report incorrectly the reason for their separation, and we find that that was an intentional misstatement to receive benefits, that also is fraud. And both this section would apply to both of those instances.
But we don't want to use the same hammer for both.
But it gives discretion.
It gives us-
I mean,
Exactly.
we're either gonna Department of Labor to act with justice, or we are going to try to micromanage it. If we take this out, I can see the headlines when some organization from, you choose a country, has committed massive identity theft and fraud. And all we can do is say, well, you can't collect benefits for us for 5 years. If we take that out, I want us to be able to prosecute.
So I think you're fine.
So
Both
TUI,
these sections.
we are we in agreement of leaving TUI alone?
I think we need to leave 2E. I'm fine with 2E as long as we leave it up.
Okay,
We
and
need
then
to the discretion
I
of
do
it.
need to definitely give people noon hard stop. So
Yeah, 'cause-
we might not vote this bill out today.
I think Kelly,
Yeah, well, that's okay. I just want to make sure people know for now,
we're due
We're-
about 15 on the floor, right?
yes, but we're TUI, we're
There's
pretty
no-
settled
there's
on
no
you have a
lunch
comment
time
about
if you-
TUI.
Yes,
Okay,
I just want to be clear about what the addition of 2E allows prosecution under 1368.
mhm,
If that happens, there's going to be, I mentioned earlier, 3 different penalties. We've got the 15% penalty Cameron mentioned, plus pay back the overpayment,
mhm.
which is already there. Plus penalty weeks or disqualification. That's an additional financial burden for a claimant that amounts to a significant additional financial penalty for a claimant. Those number of weeks that they are entitled to benefits, but they're not allowed to
So
collect.
those two things are existing law.
Existing law, and then we're adding another up to another $5,000 additional penalty on top of that. So this would be
In
the only, It to me would allow the prosecution under section 5, 1368, which provides a further administrative penalty up to $5,000.
Okay,
So
There's
the way
more.
the current law works is it's either repayment with the 15% penalty and disqualification for up to 26 weeks. Or repayment with the 15% penalty and prosecution under 1368, which can result in a $5,000 administrative penalty. If I'm understanding correctly.
but if,
This basically says 1368 will now provide $5,000 administrative penalty, the disqualification for up to 5 years, plus the repayment with the federally required penalty.
With the discretion of the commissioner, so the commissioner, for example, could
Yes.
waive all of that if it was simply a
Yes.
mistake.
So that's the change that Senator Brock's proposal brings in, is it
Right.
combines that administrative penalty and the disqualification
but I guess I'm wondering,
into being able to be applied at the same time. So it isn't up to.
It makes a much bigger amount
if there's
possible.
if there's if we don't change the language, you have the repayment and the financial penalty on the repayment, you have the number of weeks. But when I see prosecute, I see that if there is criminal fraud found that someone is engaged in, do they have other means of prosecuting that in our legal system? Cameron's saying no.
No, ma'am.
So
I believe it was about 10 years ago or so, 15 years ago, there used to be actual criminal penalties for committing unemployment insurance fraud, and that was removed.
Okay, so this adds another financial penalty, but nowhere if someone commits UI fraud is there a criminal penalty.
Correct.
Okay,
And then you don't want to put a criminal penalty on someone who's making $800 a week, on
no,
your table.
right,
So is it worth calling out here to go to Kelly, Vermont Legal Aid's concerns? Given we've combined these, is it worth calling out the commissioner's discretion to choose two different paths?
But I
That
think the
makes
May
sense.
already calls out that
Right.
the
Does
commissioner
May-
has discretion not to prosecute.
True. So
Yeah.
is there any,
That's, yeah, when you switched from the shall to the may,
yeah, no, I
now
appreciate
it's not just discretion in how much of a penalty, it's
Right.
discretion to say this is not a case worth
so
prosecuting.
we're just gonna go with the existing path that we have, this is not egregious enough that we wanna prosecute.
Right.
Or it could be, and it
Yeah.
would.
Right, they're making
So
that
it's
determination.
by putting the may in there, what I see at this point is you do have the repayment.
Mhm.
If the commissioner chooses not to prosecute, I don't see a disqualification in the statute anymore for that
Okay.
individual.
Hmm.
So for some instances, you may end up with a lesser penalty.
Mhm.
In other instances, you can have a much larger. hammer.
Okay, but section
So-
5 adds that
Section,
number.
Section 5 updates the prosecution.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But they could still decide not to use that prosecution authority.
That's what changing to the may allows them to do.
Okay,
So Cameron, do you see that differently than me? I keep turning around, but I realize. the
right,
camera's in front of me.
He's
Um,
nodding and-
No, sir,
So we're ready.
yeah.
Actually,
okay,
it's
I see it the same way. And I can assure the committee here, I mean, again, current structure is we pretty much assess penalty weeks instead of financial penalties. The department has been considering moving away from that for a long time because the issuance of penalty weeks, it doesn't seem appropriate from our perspective for many reasons. So this section that we have here, I think, is more in line with the direction we would prefer to go in as a department, which is when we find someone to have committed fraud, we will issue administrative penalties as opposed to penalty weeks prohibiting them from filing. What I will say is we would like the ability to impose the disqualification period, but we are going to reserve that for the instances where it is really egregious. If somebody is found to, as Senator Cummings has mentioned, received a few additional benefits for a few weeks. I mean, even if we find it as fraud and we require them to repay it, we're not going to immediately go to denying the person from receiving benefits for a year or multiple years. We're trying to get away from that, because it
Right.
doesn't, it's very challenging for the individual who finds themselves laid off at a future date and is in need of some sort of financial support. And it's not beneficial for us as a department, because when we offset those future benefits, we're actually not able to collect. And that's why we're also supportive of the section limiting or offset to only 50% of the weekly benefit amount. So the goal we're trying to move towards here is allowing people to file in the future, allowing them to collect, while still allowing us to kind of offset some to pay back any overpayments. At the end of the day, we're going to reserve that, period of prohibition of future filing for really egregious cases, which we do run across and we've talked about in the past.
Right, so I see 3 paths on this section, and I'm printing DFR's memo to us because I want us to at least touch on it while they're here. We're not gonna vote on this bill today, so we could think about these 3 paths. One would be to take the language out entirely, one would be to leave it in as it is, and the third would be if we wanna change the number of years or make this clearer that it's egregious at some threshold.
Yes.
So if I'm trying to get a sense of if people, where people are, and then we should just let DFR have a minute while they're here. Does anyone wanna go first?
Of us,
Yeah.
I would prefer, as much as we're able, to call out, and I don't know, maybe I don't know if Cameron or Damien or Kelly would have a threshold that would be appropriate, but discretion is big. And it would be great to just sort of narrow it a little bit and identify that this would be for the most egregious fraud cases. And I would.
I suppose we're not gonna decide this today, but a dollar amount, a
Year amount.
recommitting fraud, there might be other states that have some threshold or language, but, so that's Senator Clarkson, Senator Cummings, do you?
When we started this, it was to find, because we had massive issues with overpayments during COVID, we just did everything in the computer. And so we're trying to find a fair way of dealing with those overpayments. It didn't penalize people who weren't committing, just, they didn't know they were getting paid $10 a week more. I think we've done that. Maybe I just have a different philosophy of how you deal with people, but I don't like setting such rigid standards that you bind the ability of the commissioner to do his or her job. I think they need some discretion. All fraud is not the same. But I think they need the ability, and I don't think if you've got, foreign computer fraud going in and getting checks out. I'm not sure we have the ability to deal with that we need. Yeah, there's a whole TV things going on now about romance fraud. We've had testimony before in this committee. Online dating, but they get people to actually act as they will take the money and deposit it in bank accounts. This kind of thing could do the same thing, and I think we need to have penalties.
So you're supportive of it now with the commissioner's discretion, without further
Today,
advice.
I mean, I stand someplace else in here.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with it. I'm not sure that we have the ability to deal with that kind of
Well,
data.
the other issue that concerns me, and maybe you can address this, is those kinds of really egregious cases of fraud, particularly those that involve the foreign accent that we saw during COVID should also be able to be prosecuted by the Attorney General for criminal fraud. And to make that abundantly clear. This started, this kind of language, this bill started, but probably 3 years ago when we were first dealing with this. And I remember, Cameron, for example, you raised with me a number of issues that you see, particularly egregious cases of fraud. In some cases where there is recidivism. It's not the first time people have done it.
No.
And it's very apparent that it's fraudulent conduct as opposed to where the misrepresentation, the invention of employers, et cetera, not just a potential mistake that an innocent person might make. I want to make sure those things are criminally prosecuted. We refer to prosecution of withholding. That's not enough. I mean, I realize that my suggestions for capital punishment are probably inappropriate to most of the community.
For this,
But,
And I think they're legal.
yeah, but something other than withholding benefits and so on is really appropriate for some of these very, very egregious cases. And that is, I'm not sure that additional language might be appropriate to allow for a criminal referral.
So I think in the past, when we worked on language around that, we
Yeah.
did have additional language.
yes,
Particularly with criminal cases. I think we really do need to be very clear about what we are criminalizing.
Yes, we do.
I want to pause us.
Yeah.
We have 3 minutes left. Senator Cummings needs to go. We all do need to get lunch.
They got
We
Back to
put this
lunch.
on from 11 to 12 tomorrow. DFR folks, I apologize. I'm gonna,
But you're the state firefighter.
and if people can look at this, please do, because I'm gonna ask Damien to incorporate these changes for tomorrow. Invite fire safety, invite firefighters, invite DFR, invite everybody here at VOL. And try to get to this issue, because I think there's some worthy changes to consider in here, and to resolve this issue as well. So people should work, I mean, I could try to take this on, I'm not sure, but defining egregious, maybe Damien, if you could give us some ideas of if other states have different levels depending on a dollar amount or a, yeah,
I'm also happy to proceed if now.
okay, with the discretion.
With the discretion, and then if we find out from legal aid that this is being used in an inappropriate way, then readdress it. I think at this point where we are, I think.
You're okay.
Well, I mean, I don't know where Randy, I would not be interested in spending the time on criminal stuff at the moment.
We
I think
probably
we're
don't
fine
have
where we
to.
are, and I.
Okay, but you're okay with section 2 and 5 as written?
2E and 5 at the moment, and
Okay.
then see what happens,
Okay,
and I think that's worth.
okay. Senator Harrison, do you want to?
I missed a lot of the testimony. I did see some written testimony from legal aid that I wanted to talk about at some point or hear more about that. Looked at the implementation of the new system before implementing this or before.
Yeah,
So-
I heard you had to do that because the present
Right.
system couldn't do it.
right.
Oh, okay, so that's good news, but I'll just hold my
Yeah,
comments.
or well, talk to people offline. That's because we're doing this 11 to 12
Okay.
tomorrow, and that's probably the last day we could do
Okay.
the bill. And you know, DOL wasn't on, but we can talk about the digital piece tomorrow. It's a double-edged sword. I mean, digital can accelerate major criminal enterprise. You know, that's what we've heard all along, is that we have more limited fraud because we have paper and
Oh my god.
envelopes.
But I-
So
But I think part as well will have.
it'll have built-in protections, but if they get around those, they get around those. So I just wanna be clear, we can't, I don't wanna decide any of this based on the technology, because that's not a guarantee in either direction.
Okay.
We're done because everybody has to get lunch or
Okay.
something, and we have to finance, so we will take a vote tomorrow, that's our last day, but any conversations you wanna have should happen by tomorrow,
Okay.
because nothing can take up too much time,
Okay.
so we vote this out.
Can I share the DFR language with DFR in advance?
Please,
And with
Yeah.
fire safely?
yeah, thank you, Damien.
Great.
Yeah, you can.
No